This conference will now be recorded.
Great. Okay, so let's start off with Yarn. What is this thing, Yarn? Is it different than NPM? What is NPM? So we have most of the modern projects utilize hundreds of dependencies, like to different libraries like Bootstrap or Normalize. These are obviously simple cases. But then a lot of the more complicated libraries like Vue end up relying on a bunch of other little packages that do certain things really well, so they don't have to like reinvent the wheel. Um, so when you create a project with Yarn, you can say Yarn init. In an empty folder, this will initialize a new Yarn project, which will create a file called package.json. This package.json is where we list those dependencies. So if I open up my package.json, we'll see there are two types of dependencies. The first one is just called dependencies. The next one is called dev dependencies. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the idea is this is kind of more like public, something that needs to be available at all times after you create your project and share with people. These are supposed to be just helpers. They help you while you're building, but they end up being compiled within your code as needed. What are our dependencies here? We have Vue. We have this Vue blah, 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 Babel, which is just a modern way of writing JavaScript. We have the Vue CLI service, which I'm not really sure if it's mandatory, but I used it to create this app. The ESLint config prettier is a new standard for sharing the coding guidelines that you're going to follow with your team. So this tab with 4 indicates that when I click the tab key here, it will go 4 spaces to the right. And by having this prettier.rc file in the root of the directory, when you're working on the same code with other people, when they click tab, if they had created their setting in Visual Studio Code to be 2 spaces, Prettier will force it to go back to 4 spaces to make sure it's consistent. Otherwise, the code would look really weird when you have certain things that are indented one way, like that, and then other things are not. It becomes very ugly. Thank God for Prettier to make things really, really pretty. And the way that Prettier works within Visual Studio Code is we install an extension called Prettier. It looks for this file, reads what your settings are, and then whenever you click format, it uses Visual Studio Code to format your code. So that's the dependencies that we added inside of package.json, yada, 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 and Vue template compiler, which reads the HTML that you're writing and creates this virtual DOM. So that's the one thing about Vue and React. They don't actually use the browser's rendering system because it's very inefficient. So if you have, let's say, 3 million items showing up on an HTML page, it's going to go like and crash. With Vue and React, they create their own DOM that is handled by them and allows them to only show, like, let's say, 100 of those items that are visible to you. So if there's like a million items that you have to scroll down to, it will not render them on the page and keep them in the JavaScript memory. All right, what else is on here? The other important part is the scripts. Has anyone seen, do they look familiar at all? The first one is serve. Did we use that yesterday? Yeah, serve. Typically it's start in most other projects, but they use serve. It just serves the server to you so you can debug and test. And what do you guys think build does? Yep, it takes the code that we're writing, which is not standard HTML and JavaScript, and actually converts it into normal JavaScript and HTML that could be read by any browser, including Internet Explorer 6 somehow, or probably 7. So, as I said, it's as simple as creating a new project. So I'm going to open up another instance here real quick and open a folder. Go to my projects, click new folder, call it test. Oh, example. Go into my terminal on the bottom once it loads. So this is my terminal. And I can just type in yarn init, asking for the name of my project, the version, yada, yada, yada. You just click enter. And now what file do we create? Package.json. Doesn't really have much. Has the name of the project, the version, and then it tells you that the main file that it's going to try to load is called index.js. Why is index.js familiar? In HTML, is there that one file that we always use at the beginning? Yeah, it's the same in JavaScript. Index.js is the good beginning. So how can I install a package like, let's say I want to get Bootstrap added here. I type in yarn add Bootstrap. And what happened? It did two things. It created a folder called node modules and a file called yarnlock. Inside of node modules, I'm assuming we have the Bootstrap folder, which has the distribution files and the entire Bootstrap framework. So here's how this works. You create a project with your team and you start installing all the different dependencies, mapping software, authentication stuff, and all that good stuff. And when you submit it to something like GitHub, you ignore the node modules folder because it could be like hundreds of megabytes large, because all your teammates have to do is download the package.json file and then type in yarn. So let's delete our nodes modules. So that's what our teammate would have, just this one little file that's only a few kilobytes. And they would go into their terminal and type in yarn. Yarn is just short for yarn install. That's what I love about yarn, much cleaner code. So with yarn, you initialize the project. Do you have to do this often, type in yarn to install the dependencies? Or do you think once the node modules folder exists, you're good to go until you actually have to add another module? So let's add another one. Let's add Bulma. Oh. Bulma CSS maybe? Oh, not yard. Okay. So how would I include this in my code? I would create my index.html. And now I can add my style sheet. Oops. CSS and down. That's it. Now I use Bootstrap, and the benefit here is that it's not going to use a CDN, which has to go to the internet to get this file. How much faster do you think it is to be getting these files directly from your computer's folder than from a CDN? Like 10 times, and especially if you're on a train or working remotely on your phone in Hawaii, definitely a great thing. And you can then use, of course, the node modules to get Bootstrap added in here. All right, so that's a quick introduction to package.json. As we saw, we can create a scripts list, and add a script called start. And I'm just going to say parcel index.html. Okay. So how do you think I run my start script from the terminal? yeah, all we have to do is type in yarn and then the name of your script. So with this little tool called Parcel, it will create a server for me, which will update itself in real time. So let's see how fast it is. And what's really cool about Parcel is that I can actually add a style sheet here. And it'll be a style.less file. Now, do you think that in the live server that we use, you can actually add a less file like this and have it automatically compiled back to normal CSS? Sadly, no. And look how nice it is at telling me, hey, by the way, this file doesn't exist. So I can click, create, and now I can do something like this. And voila, it's automatically compiling the less file into CSS, and it's doing hot reloading, which doesn't actually reload the page to make the changes. So if I add the color white, you'll notice that the page doesn't get reloaded. It just instantly changes the CSS in like 0.5 seconds. So if we look at the actual HTML code, we will notice that it's created its own file called style.2c something something something.css. And this question mark here is basically to prevent cache. So as it updates the file automatically, it reloads in the browser's interface. Okay, questions about Yarn and this package.json. What format is this? Have we seen this type of JavaScript before? It's an object, right? It's a JSON object. So you're going to need to master these with the curly brackets. The difference between this JSON object and the one we use in Vue and other JavaScript is that when it's a .json file, it's more strict and it requires you to put quotes around the key and the value. Basically, everything has to have quotes in it as a string. All right, so that is package.json. Every single project you see online will have one. So if you go to Bootstrap and look at their code, what do we find right down here? A package.json. And what do they have here? They have a couple of scripts to do various things. Wow, actually, I think they take the cake for the most scripts I've seen. And their dependencies are Babel, auto prefixer, Babel, clean CSS, yada, yada, yada. Oh, yeah. A good list of these dependencies. And those were under dev, meaning that not all of them will be bundled with the final product. And if you want to stop your server when you have like Vue serve basically running, you just do Control-C. In terminal, stopping anything that's going on, you do Control and C, and that'll kill it. Although I think also just closing the actual terminal should also work for the most part. Let's go back to our project. All right. And we're going to start off from absolute scratch. Take these out. And take that out. You do need this div ID app, because what Vue is actually doing is using that element to put its virtual DOM inside of it. So in this main.js file, which you never really need to worry about, you see how it says render the app and then mount it to the ID app element. So you can't take out this this div. It's definitely required. It uses its like hook. All right. So did we clear it up enough? I'd say so. Okay. Starting with the template, it's almost exactly like HTML, except Vue gives us some additional coolness. Huh? I'm definitely am, yes. So let's have a div with a class test and add some text. So do I need to run yarn install if I already have the node modules here? No, so yarn or yarn install is only run the first time you open the folder. So if you do download the project all over again, start from scratch, you have to run yarn to install the dependencies, and then you can do yarn serve. If you try to run yarn serve without installing it first, it should scream, hey, I don't see these modules. So here it's saying view CLI service command not found. The package doesn't exist in our node modules, so it can't do it. So yarn install. And it's going to do all these little fancy things to get all our node modules organized. This yarn.log file, by the way, is another reason I prefer yarn. With NPM, when you share the package.json, it can actually happen where your colleague runs the package.json install, and it would install different versions of the different modules that it depends on. And sometimes a different version could actually break the code because of some like miscommunication between the different versions. So Yarn is really good at making sure that each person gets the exact same node module folder to the T. All right, we got Yarn installed, and now we can say Yarn serve. I'm actually going to change this to start because it's much prettier. Basically, add the command code start, which runs Yarn serve. It is what we call a alias.
What do you store aliases and points and stuff in Vue?
In Vue, you actually create a folder called like assets.
Inside the source?
Yeah, everything has to go inside the source. And let's add our image. Oh, this guy's cool. We can find somebody. There we go. That's how everybody should dress up for class, to be honest. Otherwise, you're doing it wrong. I will be wearing that outfit next week, I promise. So, project, view, source, assets. All right. And then inside of view, I think you should be able to simply say image source, assets. Very nice. Now, two ways to basically track if you have any issues in your code. The terminal is actually a really nice runner, which will keep saying success if everything's okay. And if you break something, like remove a comma here, it will nicely highlight the code that is broken. Keep in mind, in like almost every programming language, when the compiler thinks there's an error on a specific line, it is pretty common that the error is actually on the previous line. So here, we're missing the comma right there. And Visual Studio Code is much smarter because you can hover over it and say, hey, where's my comma? So we can add that back as soon as I save. Oh, I scrolled up. It will automatically show me that it's okay. There is another way to do this. Inside of your actual server, you can do inspect and go into the console, which will output the exact same message. And it might be actually prettier and easier to see on the page here. So up to you which one you want to use. I like using the terminal mainly so I don't have to keep this console open. So let's see why our image is broken. There it is. So you need this dot slash, I guess. Kind of frustrating, but seems to be the case. What does the dot mean? Start from this directory. So it doesn't have to guess where it's going, the compiler basically. Okay, so let's do something really, really cool and add a variable inside of our data. I will add age and set it to 52. Double curly brackets, and then type in age. This is called template variable binding. And for those of you who are interested in my server, you can all now access it from anywhere in the world by going to the chat. Cool. Okay, so what is happening here with this, or this curly brackets, and what is the templating system? So obviously the first really big benefit is that that variable age is bound to that template with the curly brackets. So whenever age changes, it will automatically instantly change the page without reloading the page, without doing anything intense. And I believe inside of these curly brackets, you actually have the ability to even run JavaScript, maybe? Let's see. Oh, that doesn't work. Yep, 52 plus 2 is 4. Where could this be useful? In what situation could we actually utilize this power of a template variable that we can actually change? I mean, obviously, I can always add like additional text on the sides here, like my age is 52. And is this easier adding a string like that in normal HTML text than using those quotes that we use for the prompts? Yeah, I hope so. The only trick is to learn these double curly brackets, which I think is a lot simpler than React. So now let's do something fancy and add the ability to handle a click. We're going to create a method called change number. And where do our functions go? Inside the methods object. So here we can say change number. And this dot age. Yeah, plus 52. Thank you. Well, let's actually change it back, see what it will actually tell us where we can find the problem with our code. The nice thing is that it seems to be rendering the page, and the error is found up here. What does it say? Property or method change number is not defined on the instance, but referenced during the render. What do you think all this jargon means? What is the render? What Vue does is it takes that template and then parses it to look for the variables you've added. Any place you type in app click, it creates a handler in JavaScript to handle the clicking action. So let's fix it and see if it works. Change number. Okay. And click. Pretty powerful, right? With one simple attribute called app_click, we've made it so that the whole div is now bound to a click action that you can handle with this change number function. Do you guys know why you don't put the parentheses there, typically? So if you have like normal JavaScript code, what happens when you add the parentheses next to the function name? Yep. So if I type in test, then I'm going to execute that function right away. If I type in test like that, what is that equivalent to? Yeah, so this syntax is like something that I think confuses people, but if you actually did it like this, I think it makes a lot more sense. There's no difference between that and using the function name thing. You are storing a variable when you create a function, because you can call that function at any time. It's just a different type of variable. So I can use this to assign test into some, hey, whenever you click it, here's the function to call. So then Vue is going to be able to call that function. All right, let's do something even more fancy. Date. And let's bind date to date. Okay. Here's what JavaScript gives us Wednesday, February 6th at this time. Let's put it in its own div so it's prettier. What if I wanted to update the date every second? Would that be hard? Well, I'm going to do the simpler way, which is create a function called change time every second. And I will create an interval which executes date equals and we pass two things to the function, the time. Oh, actually, I did this a smart way, so it shouldn't have to. Okay. Can you ever see the code? Change time every second has a interval which would be executed about like every 1,000 milliseconds. And we have to actually start that code. So I'll create another button. It doesn't like, oh, that my button ends with a div. Okay. So is the time changing every second currently? Let's see if we can start it. So I just created a clock. Every second. Set interval is a JavaScript function, and the syntax is set interval, and within it you pass a function that will be executed. So function, parentheses, curly brackets, and inside of it you could like alert something, do whatever code you want. Then you add a comma and you specify the time, because what is set interval itself? What type of variable is it? If it executes code, how do you store code? Inside up? Really? Okay, yeah, functions. So alert, prompt, parse int, those are just functions that JavaScript has created to help us do certain things. And the interesting thing about set interval is that we're passing a function which is called an anonymous function. Why is it anonymous? Have we added a name for it? Have we named it anything? Nope. And we don't have to, because it's only used in this one little situation where the interval runs. And how many parameters does set interval take? So the first parameter it needs is a function, which does something like console log now. And what's the second parameter? Milliseconds. Yeah, so 1,000 is 1 second, 2,000 would be 2 seconds. So I think this may make it a little simpler, considering that you need to pass a function. You can create the function elsewhere and pass it in. Am I using parentheses after this? Because who's responsible for running that function? Me right now, or the set interval functionality every single second? If I pass it that, it will look for a return that should come from here, and it will want it to be a function, so I can return one, which gets crazy, but hopefully that makes some sense. If you give it a function, then it needs the function to return another function that it can actually be using. So let's not confuse each other, though. We just created a clock, so we should be proud of ourselves. How does it work? On a click, change the time every second. What other options would there be here for a button? What do we use in CSS that allows us to actually interact with the page with CSS? Like when we go over a button, what can we do to make it different style? Yeah, when you hover over a button, that's really all CSS has as far as power goes. Do you think we can do @hover? Probably, although I think there might be a small problem, which we'll find out in a second here. So let's reload. My timer should now be going until I go over it. No, I think the problem with hover is that click is a pretty obvious action. It's one interaction. You click and it happens. With hover, there's actually two interactions. There's hover over and hover out. So I'm assuming that view wants one or the other. So mouse over. Yep, mouse over. So mouse. And we've installed all the extensions here in Visual Studio Code, so it's going to auto-suggest all your options. We have mouse down, mouse enter, leave, and over. So now my code may actually work. Hey, look at that. Timer. What if we added a handler here? I hope it allows us, which is mouse wheel. What do you guys think that could be used for? Or what does that mean? It will detect the user scrolling up and down your div app. And how could you use that? Have you guys seen those modern websites where when you start scrolling, it doesn't like scroll normal, but actually jumps to the next session for you? So yeah, you would basically handle the scroll of the mouse, and then as soon as it scroll down enough, you would just jump the page down. But for now, let's just see what kind of value we can get out of it. Let's see if we can just tell ourselves that we're scrolling. Oh, see a little counter? It just doesn't want to flood my console log with all these statements. Well, how can we make that a little more useful? What if we get the location of the scroll? I think that might work. That's okay. Sometimes when there's like an error in your code, it may require you to reload the actual browser. So if things are not reloading and working, now we should go scroll a bit. Offset, offset height. Can I try that? All right, we don't need to get too deep. What else might you want to do with the user's scrolling? So if the user starts scrolling down or up, can you think of a useful case scenario where you could benefit from that data? Yeah, so Google Analytics does that. Yeah, like tracking systems would actually figure out, hey, how many people go below the fold? So that's obviously important metric. I'm using a lot of scrolling handling for the chat application. So if somebody sends you a message, it automatically scrolls down the list to keep showing you the messages. So here's the latest preview. I made this animation for fun. And let's look at a functionality for scrolling that is kind of useful. All right, so we type messages, and they keep showing up. See how it keeps scrolling down? What if you scroll up and somebody sends you a new message? Well, I personally hate when it scrolls you all the way back down. So in my app, I made it so that if you scroll up, the second I detect you scrolling up, I disable automatic scroll down. And once you go to the bottom, I detect you've hit the bottom and I re-enable it. I also had an arrow pointing down so you can automatically scroll to the bottom. But yeah, there are definitely situations where you might want to handle the user scrolling. All right, so we got mouse wheel, mouse down, those are cool. But now let's get to the important stuff, which is handling data within input fields, text areas, etc. So I'm going to format this document, and then I'm going to add a input field. How is that going to look like in my page? Cool. what other types of things I might want to do with an input field? How do we use it in the tip calculator? We bound the value of that input field to one of our variables. So I have a variable called age. I'm going to use the view functionality to create a model, which just basically binds it to age. And now the value inside of this input is gotten from where? Where does this 52 come from? Yeah, down here in the data. If I didn't have this, it would complain on multiple levels because I'm trying to use it as a variable up there. And it's showing us NaN, which is not a number. And within the input field, there's obviously zilch. So let's see what happens when I put it back. And I change it. What do you think would happen when I start changing that value? Is it going to change the number up here? Yep. But it's not a number because it's an input that doesn't have a type, right? So that prevents it from having any kind of characters. So type equals number. Now we can actually prevent the user from typing in anything. So why is it changing the variable up there in the string parameter because of this input? How is this, why and how is this code doing that? Which variable are we using here? Age. And they used to call this, I think, bind. Sadly, they went to a more modern naming called model. So you're just saying, I want my data for this variable to be represented with this input field, meaning that if the data changes from somewhere else, like a method or a click action, it should change the value in the input field, and vice versa. If it changes in the input field, I want it to update everywhere else it's being used. So that's called two-way binding. Both the data changes from outside and changes the input field, or you change the input field and the data changes from elsewhere. And I can give you an example of that by clicking that first button. What did that button do? What was the functionality here? I think it adds like 2, yeah, right? Adds 52 to it. So it takes this dot age equals this age plus 52. So let's click it. Yeah, what is it doing? It's treating it like a string. How do you think we go about fixing that problem? Considering I'm not a Vue expert, what would I do? Come on, guys. No, I would go to Google and type in like Vue input bind integer. There you go. They have amazing documentation. Aha. V model selected, find value number. No, I don't think that's it. True value and false value attributes don't affect the input's value. To guarantee one of the two values submitted. Sure, no. Okay, if you want user input to be automatically typecasted as a number, you can add the dot number magical HTML attribute. So dot number. God, I love their syntax. I mean, that's as pretty as it gets. You don't have to do parse ints or anything like that. So now if we click change me, it adds as a number. It's pretty cool. I mean, really is 100 times easier than using parse int. So we had some problems with that yesterday. I think this might resolve some of that headache. They also have trim. Who knows what trim does? Yeah, so a lot of times when you like, let's say, copy a link from somewhere or some value, it actually ends up selecting like some additional space or an extra line. And if that's your username, it won't actually log you in with additional stuff, so you can trim it. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Now, let's try to handle another event. What if we wanted to prevent the user from entering a value larger than 1,000? We have two options. One, we can use HTML is actually built-in functionality they added recently. So it's something like max length, I think, 52 maybe. Let's see if that works. Max attribute. So there's a min, max. You know what was weird? I don't remember. Oh, there it is. Ah, look, when you use the little scroller, it will only go up to my set limits, but then it lets you type in additional information. So how do we do that with Vue? Which action do we want to handle on that input field that the user will perform to stop them and prevent them from going up or down of our limits? What do you guys think you would name the action of somebody interacting with an input field? Yeah, you would handle them clicking on a character. So if they click on 7, we can say at key down prevent large. Why would we handle the key down versus the key up? Yeah, with the key down, you actually have the ability to stop it from actually entering the input field before it gets actually added. After they put the key up, they already have the value there. So I named it prevent large. And what we can say is, this will actually not work, but that's okay. Age is greater than 52. Then what do we do? I think one option would be to say this.age, force it to be 52 maybe. Let's try if that works. Yeah, kind of, not really. I think another option may be to return false, maybe. One thing I was trying to stay away from was going into the whole browser's way of handling things. Every interaction the user has with a browser is called an event. So the event of clicking, the event of scrolling, all of these things we're binding here, click, key up, all that good stuff, these are all called events. And what's really cool about Vue is that it gives us access to that event, I believe, as simple as this. Let's verify. Testing. Yep, there it is. All right. Where does this come from? It's called a keyboard event. Who gives us that? The browser, right? It's the browser's job to detect your clicking and then send it to the actual website to figure out what to do. What type of information is stored in here? A lot of useless information. The good information is, for example, this key code, which tells you which character they've clicked on. There's a bunch of online maps for that. It tells you which element exactly was clicked with a whole tree of HTML. And a bunch of other interesting things. All I care about is if I can then say e.prevent default. Fingers crossed. Interesting. So after I type one more time, it erases it. Maybe we can try the key up event. Why would the key up event work rather than key down?
With the key up, they've already set the value from the model. Visualize the same this interaction here. We have our input field, which is bound to our data variable called age. You build all the magic behind the scenes, but it's tracking any changes that happen here and making sure they get updated here. And it's tracking any changes it might do from other places and putting them back in here. At what point do you think this input field sends the updated data to here? Is it when the user clicks the key down, or when he lets go of the key and he's kind of done with that action? The key up. The key up. So there's even, I think, one called key press to kind of handle that entire situation. And what was happening here was that when they clicked the key down the first time, the value hadn't updated. So in here, this .age was actually not greater than 52 by the time they pressed the key down. And then as soon as they let it go, the value got updated, but it was too late. So then when you click it the second time, what's the value? Let's look at it. Maybe not. Wait, okay, yeah, there we go. So I click 6, and it stays. Because the value got updated after I released the key. And I'm checking that value. My code is actually checking the value at the time of pressing it down. We could also use key press. I think that's the standard handler. And then what is it doing? It gets the value and then changes it back to 52. The reason I was trying to use return false and prevent default was because I was trying to stop it before it happens. And I still think there's a way to do that. Where might we get information about what's in that input field before it updates our actual data variable. So who has the actual information of which keys being pressed? The browser, exactly, yeah. So that event object it's giving us has all the information. So what can I do? I can use some library
and check. So let's try first e.target.value. Maybe that'll work. That'd be really cool. Wow, now it's working way better than before. Oh, it's preventing everything. That's why. There we go. Okay. Let's see when we get the value into the console. I click 4. Is it getting it? No, it looks like it's getting the old value, right? So I click 8, and it shows me the 7. Okay. What if we did e dot key code? I forget which one of these is more useful. What do you think of these blue numbers on the bottom? It's the basically JavaScript has a mapping for each one of the characters in the keyboard to a specific number. So yes, key map. Key code, convert between key. There we go. That looks good. Okay. So let's see. This is a very important process that you guys are going to go through in your career as a web developer. You're going to go around and look for it's called an npm package, and this package is called key code. So how would I install it into my project? Yep, I will do a yarn add key code. Where does that get added to? In my nodes module. Thanks to us using modern JavaScript, it's actually much easier to add it to our code. All we have to do is type in import key code from key code. Voila. We have access to this amazing, hopefully, functionality. Now we can take that key code function and try to parse one of these. All right, let's hope for magic. It may ask me to restart the project per chance. Let's see. Oh, cool. Look, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. I'll enable my keycaster so you guys can actually see what I'm typing. It's a shame because it looks very much allowed. Huh, does work. Okay. what is this key code thing that we added similar to? Have we used some kind of a function within our code? It comes from somewhere else that we didn't write. Any function at all that we've used so far in this class? Like alert, that's a function. Who gives us alert function? Yeah. Set interval, prompt, etc. So the browser doesn't want to overload it with like millions of functions to do millions of things. So instead, you can install packages as simple as yarn add key code and then just import it into your code. So now let's see what we can do here. We can say if this.age plus key code is greater than 52, then change it to 52, prevent the default functionality of the browser. All right, I have good hopes for this. So I click 5, nothing happens. I erase it, works fine. 1, great. 11, beautiful. So this is kind of some of the things you need to think about. One of them is very important, is that event. And I can't tell you how many times I spent, countless hours looking through that insanely huge object that the browser gives you, because at different times you end up needing different parts of that object for some manipulation. What I do love about modern JavaScript debugging is that when it gives you a reference to some element, so let's look at this list here, like this path, as soon as I hover over an element in this, what looks like an object, it's actually highlighting it on the screen for me so I can see exactly where this element is. This becomes extremely useful when you're actually looping through a list of, let's say, 1 million items and one of them is not working the way you want, so that when you look at this code for the event, you can figure out where it's coming from. What do you think is actually the use case for knowing if the shift key is being pressed down at the same time, or you have some other combination of keys? What do we do with combination of keys instead of Visual Studio Code? Yeah, shortcuts. So in Gmail, I use a lot of the shortcuts to save me time. If I type in, if I do like square bracket right, it'll go to the next email, square bracket left. So if you have an application that needs to use shortcuts, then you can handle that. How do you think we would make our app to handle shortcut globally? So if user types in Shift S, the one to alert, how you sure you want to save this? Lazan, where should I bind my key handler inside of my code? What is my most global element to tag onto to handle that event of key up? Well, what is our like outermost element here? Sorry? So if we look at the structure of this HTML, what is the biggest parent, the most high up big dog? Yeah, I don't know if they actually allow us to tag onto template. So let's just try doing it on app and just say on key down handle shortcut. And thank God for this cool application that I've never seen before and I will now use religiously. Handle shortcut, I believe I called it. Yep. And as I said, by default, Vue is going to pass that event. I'm pretty sure you can name it anything you want. So let's just call it E for event or even event. So how would I now figure out if the user pressed Shift and S at the same time? First, I probably want to figure out which keys were being pressed. So I'd say if key, what's it called? key code, is it? Yep. Key code parentheses event dot key code equals equals equals. I assume they call it shift, hopefully, and reuse recycle equals 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 s. Now, how would I do like a little sanity here before I actually try to run in an application and try to pull my hair out? Why is it not working? Would I be curious to know what comes out of these values here? Yeah. How can I output that to somewhere I can actually see it? Yeah, I can console log, paste, add a comma. That's a nice thing. That's better than alert. And then add comma. I have a feeling that we do have to handle a slightly different thing, but let's see what happens. First of all, let's see if even being able to bind to app works. So, nope, seems to be no handling there. Once we click inside of here, though, it is able to handle it. So, Shift O seems to be sending two separate events. So instead, I think we have to do is just say if event shift key. Let's see if that gives us something different. Ah, see what it does? It says shift true, O true, closer. How do I find out the ability to actually bind to the entire browser with Vue? All right, Stack Overflow is our friend. Mount Vue to that. Oh, interesting. They want us to go all the way back into that initial system and mount it onto the entire Element app. Okay, that's cool, but what if we can make it easier? Maybe we get lucky. And then I'm gonna use this and call it big and just force it to take over the entire page. We didn't cover this too much, so I guess nice extra lesson. We can position it fixed and just say top 0, left 0, right 0, bottom 0. And we just need a Z index to position it on top of all the content. Okay, so hopefully now that we have our big element, we can handle clicking anywhere. Fingers crossed. Nope, no go. How else would you be able to handle the browser's event handling of clicking anywhere? What do you think is the element that HTML regards as the owner of the page? If you have too much content, where does the scroll bar apply to? The HTML or the body? Where do we put the content if we do want to actually show up to the user? Yeah, in the body. So with pure JavaScript, you would be able to basically say document.body and then add event listener to listen for key up. But let's not get too crazy here. All right, so let's start over and build a tip calculator. definitely want to share some best practices here that I think will keep you, I think, very, very sane. So the first thing you want to do when you're building an application is outline it, draw it. I'm going to use my fancy new tool called Whiteboard so we can jot down some notes. All right. First, I'm going to just mark a couple of boxes here. So box, sadly you can't copy them. Which seems like inefficient work. Has anyone been using the InVision Studio? I was using it today. It's so cool that they made that free. All right, here's an input box. And we can make a couple more. All right, what data do we need to collect from the user? First, we need the number of people. Now, thinking as a web developer, is there a reason to make the user type in like digits when I think 90% of the time it's going to be how many people? 2, 3, 4, 5, at most 8? Like, how often do you think it's more than 8 people? Pretty rarely, right? So what if instead of doing a text input field, we simply put like buttons and just put like a little number value inside of them. 1, 2, and 3. Why would this be useful on desktop, but also likely much more useful on mobile? You think it's easier to type in like keyboard, the little keyboard keys, or is it easier just to click on one, select it, and be done with it? Yeah, it's always good to think how you can make your users' life better. And I'm sure that you can simply add a button at the end that allows you to enter an actual value. So that should do it. What's the next thing we need to know? The percentage, the tip. And that's actually another situation where do you want them to type in 12.36? Or do you think that 15%, 18%, those like 6 standards basically will be good enough? Yeah, I think those would work. So I'm going to copy those over. We got our.
Is there like a built-in slider? Like an
Yep. Yeah, there's a slider. There's many great components you can use, and you just import it and then use it. It's really straightforward. So tip and percent and so on. Okay. What else do we need to know? The total bill, right? If I was building this app and I like to innovate, I would have it so you just take a picture of your receipt and it just parses the number, because nowadays there's like a million services with JavaScript that can parse an image pretty easily to find the numbers. But for now, we'll just actually use an input field. There they are. So total bill. What else do we have? Pretty much it, right? So then we just need to render 2 values to the user, which is per person total and what else? Like tip, right? So per person tip and total, so they don't have to do the math themselves. And if we're making this a really nice interface, we would actually imitate a receipt in like the whole little like that, the 2 lines, and then one says like tip, and the other one says total. Because when you imitate the actual real life object, it makes it easy for them to not even think, just copy put the value. So how many variables do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wonderful. I'm going to create an image out of this because it's gorgeous. And let's see if we can grab that image from my stuff. Cool. Did it open? There we go. Okay. And why did I do that? So that I can look at it side by side with my code and easily make the changes I need to my app. All right. First variable. Haven, what's going to be my first variable? And the syntax is number people. What's next? Percentage? Like that?
Oh, no.
Next character type. So on the left is our key, and then colon value. So we can put 0, but I'm going to put a smart default of, let's say, just one person calculating tip. And then tip, I'll set that to 15. Total, set that to 0. What else? Robert, what's our next variable? Come on, it's on the image. We've gone through the first 3. Yep, cool. And that would be 0. And the next one is Claire? Total. Cool. Oh, no, we cannot. It will work because the second one will just override the first one, but let's not do that. Total. Yeah. Great. Thank you, guys. Debugging as a team. Okay. Now I need to figure out what are the types of calculations I need to make. So what are the functions we have here? The interaction. Let's just start with the interactions. What does the user do with this page first? What's his first action? Cecilia, what's the first thing they have to do when they see this interface to interact with it? Yep, they have to click on the number of people, right? So we need to handle them clicking on number of people. So click on number of people. And what information do we need to know inside of this function? Currently, how many parameters are getting passed into it? What's in the parentheses? Sorry, how many parameters are currently passing? Inside the parentheses. Huh? 0. There's nothing inside of these parentheses, meaning this function takes in nothing. We're empty space. But what do we actually need to know? We have how many options to click on? 4 options. So we need to pass in which option selected. Okay. And how would we actually handle that in the code? I would create a div class number of people. And then I would create 4 buttons. You can definitely use Bootstrap. Yeah, it's basically like normal HTML. Although Bootstrap has its own like UI library for Vue, which interacts with it automatically. So when you add like a carousel, you almost don't have to write any JavaScript code and it just works. So that's the nice thing about the Vue Bootstrap version. It automatically does a lot of fancy stuff for you. All right, so how do I bind a click on one of these numbers? What's that first character that indicates handling an event? At, yeah, the little mail symbol. At which event do you want to handle yours on? Huh? Click, cool. And then we can say, when you click on it, run my function called and I believe we can actually say pass in the value of 1. I think Vue might be smart enough to not run it because we're trying to pass in value. I'm not 100%, but let's see. In the real world, we actually would loop through an array and just say, okay, go 4 times and do the same thing, just changing the value. But for now, let's keep it simple. All right. And what's my way of testing this? Let's see here. Sarah, how do I now try this functionality as a sanity check? Do I run it, or is there one thing I should do first? Yeah, let's see what it's passing to our function. Yeah. So a div cannot have a model because a div doesn't allow to actually like store and change the information within itself. A div only has events available to it, like clicking, hovering over, etc. So it's an event handler rather than an actual input system. Model binding has to happen to an actual user input, text area, checkbox, radio button, date picker, etc. Those have an actual like value changes inside of the system. In here, we're not actually changing any value within the context of that div. The only time you could do a vModel is a modern functionality in HTML, which allows you to make any element into kind of an editable text element. But let's not get into that. Let's just see our sanity check if clicking on these buttons actually does anything. All right. So we're going to click on 2. Ah, there's 2, 3, 4. And what it looks like is these are blue. Do you know what the console outputting a blue color means versus black? They're not links. Yeah, it's saying it's an integer, which is nice because we don't want that to be a string. So that's one cool indicator. Now let's see what we can do with that. What do we need to set from them having selected the actual number of people? We should probably update that number of people thing, right? So we're going to say this number of people equals to which option selected. Quick thing about this, it used to for a long time like kind of baffle me. I just ignored it. I just knew kind of sort of when I'm supposed to use it. But the reality of this is that when you are inside of a JavaScript object, this always refers to our entire object, which in this case is our Vue app. So when you put in this data here and you return it, it's automatically just binding it to that document so we can access it at any time. All right. And how can I now sanity check that that variable is actually changing within our system? How can I output it somewhere to see it? Could I maybe add a div that says selected people? and just put in number of people. That might work. Let's try it. Four, three, two. But in a normal application, what would you expect to happen when you click on it? Some visual maybe indication that it's selected. So how does Vue handle that magic? It's been a while since I've done that, but let's say class let's see. Oops. Yeah, they definitely have the best documentation I've seen by far. So we can use this bind class versus, I guess there's no simple syntax, but Sarah, this is kind of cool, right? We're actually going to bind something now into a div. So what do you think we're binding here? Thoughts? What does this vbind colon class do? What is class? Have you seen that before somewhere in another code, in another language we've written? Yes. Yes. So then what we're saying is, here's some normal thing we recognize, but we're saying bind the class to that object. And the way this object works is it will apply your class on the left, or basically the name you choose, if the thing on the right is true. So in our case, we want to say active if number of people equals 1. Okay? And since we do also want to have that num class, we should put that here too. We're going to say it's always true. Right. Okay. Let's add a little CSS to visualize it. Oops, we have our default class called num. How do we make those buttons display inline block? Add some padding. And then if it's active, .num has also the class of active. Add a background of red. So maybe this does all that we need. Cool. Well, that's a good indicator that as soon as I open the page, which one is selected? Because where do we define it to be 1? In our data, we've said that it should be 1. So now we simply have to, replicate this awesomeness a few times. And I wish we could get into looping now, but we can manually for a little bit. Yeah, I am having a hard time coding standing up. All right, so now we should have a closer indication, especially after we fix these. All right, so 2, 3, 4, pretty good. I know this whole syntax here of having an object that has the class name on the left and a condition on the right is kind of strange. It's not even actually real JSON per se, but the idea is you can add as many classes as you want that have a condition. If you always want the class to show up, just set it to true. And then if you want to check against some condition of something is equal to something else, you change it there. what do you think is that most common scenario in every website we build that we're gonna have to check and set this class active? Every website has it. It's near the top. Navigation. Yeah, the navigation requires that if you click on some other tab page, it gets highlighted and you know which one you're on. So now we have the first part of our calculator almost ready. What are the other parts? We need to add our tip. So that should be pretty straightforward considering we've done most of the hard lifting here. Tip. And I'm just going to add like 2 values to make it a little simpler on us. And 20. Okay. What else? Total bill. Which should be what type of input? Text? Checkbox? Wake up? Number, right? Okay. And then we need an input for, actually we don't need input for the rest. Let's just do a couple of things. If we want to make sure that when the user types in a value, it adds it to the variable, how do we bind that field? Sadly, we don't use vbind, we use, vmodel. And what do we model it to? Total bill. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you for that. Dot number to force it to parse into a number. And now we can output the 2 resulting values, which is total per person and I love that autocomplete here. Total bill, okay? No, total per person, total. Okay. We've handled the clicking on people. We need to also handle the clicking on tip %. So click on tip. And make sure that when you create a function handler, you actually have the function. What do you think the problem is? Missing a comma, because it's a JSON object. And how should we handle the actual calculating it into those final variables? What are our options? We can do a function that's triggered by a button. We can bind a key up or any one of these functions as it gets called. They could run this calculate method. Let's just say calculate tip. And what's the math here? So we have we can store a variable called tip. What was it? Come on, guys. First thing is number of people divided by the bill, or should we first calculate the tip? Okay, let's calculate the tip. So tip amount total bill is equal to total bill, this of course, times tip divided by 100. And then we have what? We divided by the number of people. So now we can actually get the this dot total per person. Sorry? Thank you. And now we have tip amount total bill divided by this dot number of people. Yes. Which one? I'm sorry. 58?
Yeah.
Ah. This dot tip? Oh, yes. Good. And what's the last thing? We need to get the total for the person. So we would get that by saying this dot total per person is equal to this dot total bill divided by number of people plus this dot tip per person, right? We do need to do the parentheses just to be safe here, even though it should work. And what else am I left to do? Is it just going to update and work? No, we actually have to trigger that calculate somehow. So let's add a little button here. All right, well, code never works the first time you write it. So let's not hope for too much. But we're going to say 2 people, 15%. Sweet. 2 people, 15%, $100 bill, calculate values. Let's name our values so that we can understand what's happening here. Tip and total. So we can have like a nice H2 per person. Let's add some namings here as well. All right, what else do we need? Oh, it's gorgeous. Total bill. That's the last thing we can name. Okay. Now let's see if our glorious calculator is working as expected. 2 people, 20% tip, $1,200 bill, calculate. Does that look right? What was the tricky one we're doing? 3 people, 15, 200? There we go. Total. Now, as I said, Vue is pretty awesome, so I'm just making the assumption that they might even round for us. They have these things called filters, actually pretty cool. Allows you to take in a normal variable you have and then apply some kind of filter like capitalize. You can create your own filters as well. We can, yes, we can. When we're calculating that value, we can change it. I think we can even do something like this. Or number, maybe? Where'd you go? There's. And how do we test this easier? We can probably set the default values to the ones we want to test for. Was it 3 people, 50%, 200? Oops. Great, that's good enough. Where can I add the float or the two fixed? Should I add it down here to store it inside of our total per person? Should I like wrap these guys up here and down here? Or should I do it up in my template? Yeah, why would we want to do that? Who can tell me why that's useful? Sorry?
No, well, it actually shouldn't change to a string.
But what the usefulness is that it's nice to actually keep the crazy, like complicated data of like 7.2223 because maybe you need to perform some other calculations. So always having that original data stored in the code itself is better than manipulating and storing the value. So in this situation, let's say we have 77, but the reality is that it was 77 and 33 cents. So let's say that your application is actually sending this data to like Firebase or some other database. Well, if you eventually change your mind on how you want to show that data, you have lost all those basically numbers in the process. So two fixed two. Well, I don't know why 7633 is now 7667, but here is the solution if you guys ever have any interest. These guys, I can't even tell you how many things they handle really, really well. But any of these libraries, how do you add it to your project? Yeah, yarn add math.js, and then let's see how much better they can do that for us. First, it's going to tell us I can't find math.js. If you have Parser, it would just install it for you, but here we go. So tab number 1. Nope. Yarn add math.js. In the meantime, we can figure out round. Okay. Oh, we should probably do that. Math, that's good, yeah. That's importing all the different functionalities from their system. And now we can hopefully do math.round. Do you know why this doesn't conflict with the JavaScript version of math dot something? Yeah, lowercase. Pretty bold move on their end. I don't know why they didn't just choose some funny name like, yeah. All right. Ooh, what happened? Round of undefined. I think it's not going to allow us to run these there because they're not the filters they want you to use. So let's do this. Okay, looks like that is back in working order, hopefully. That's right, I forgot how to padding. So 315, 200, calculate, that's rounding up to a number. Parsing evaluation. Yeah, it does a lot of crazy things. I think something as simple as math.compile might work. Math eval maybe. Let's see if that's fancy enough. The documentation is too small. How do you guys force Google to actually find results matching a keyword? Ah, yes, comma, number of decimals. So it's easier than we thought. Theorizing and testing. Okay, so I'm assuming that's actually the correct value. I trust Math.js over JavaScript mathematical skills. Does anyone feel a little more comfortable about doing a tip calculator with Vue? Okay, good, good. Well, go home and the homework is to actually build this yourself. Use the base project, watch this video, follow it wherever you need. But I think once you start practicing and adding your own buttons to handle a click or input fields to get some user data, it does get really exciting once this little debugger here keeps green for a while. When it does turn red, you're obviously going to have to go to Google sometimes to try to figure it out if it's a huge error, especially as you're trying to import these libraries, as you saw. Not always as smooth as butter, but I gotta say, compared to what we used to have to do to add a whole library, it's definitely a lot simpler. We will also go in depth on adding, like we said, like Bootstrap. So there's a Vue Bootstrap version, and there are a lot of benefits to using it. Let's look at an example. So they have these components like alert. And look at how much different the syntax code is than what we're used to. Are there any classes that we have to do? No classes. You don't have to figure out B3 and all that annoying stuff. Instead, it's actually quite easily visible. You do B alert, variant success. So how would we add this to our project? Hey, they have the yarn command. Copy the yarn command, paste it, and then we can add the Bootstrap. Now this is actually slightly different than what we did a second ago because they want you to have access to it throughout your whole application, even on the other pages. So you go into the main.js and then you say that. Copy and paste what they told you to put there, basically. And now we can import, I guess, the CSS. Probably here. And yeah, actually, that's another thing I love about this more than React is that I think once you've done this, added these few lines here, I think we can actually just go ahead and use these without importing them into that document there. Let's see if I'm right. Copy this ugly code and test. Did I close it? There. Cool. That was way easier than I expected. So what were the steps? Yazan, what were the steps to add Bootstrap to our Vue? Huh? Okay, so we go into their official website, which was bootstrap-vue, whatever. We go to get started, and it has the command for both npm or yarn. With yarn, it's add bootstrap vue. Where would you run this command? In the terminal inside of our project here, yep. So I would run it as the dependency for us. Then where do we add these? That's the trickier part. Sadly, we don't do it in app view. We do it in the main file because that gives it access to any page we create, because we can make another 10 different pages. And this is, again, much better than React. With React, you have to do it in every single file. Here, globally, we say we want Bootstrap. Format. And voila, we have access to it. So we added these. Let me separate the lines so we can see them. There we go. So how many lines? 4 lines, right? Here's the cool thing about this versus that HTML file that I showed you that I created at the beginning. Thanks to these modern JavaScript libraries, you don't have to type in node modules. When you say import, it only assumes that you're going to be like looking at the node module folder. So this is still the link inside of the node modules, but you don't have to type in node modules. And when you type in Bootstrap Vue, it looks for the package JS name to find it and install it. And then this is Vue's way of binding the whole library that you just added into their whole rendering system, right? So is this normal HTML, Claire? Have we ever seen a balert element? No, yeah, so this is basically called a component. It's Vue's own HTML world where you can create as many of these as you want. And it makes it much nicer than looking at a bunch of divs, because you can see with the name of what this is. It's a Bootstrap alert. And here I'm assuming we can control whether to show it or not to show it. So if I wanted to hide this, how would I change this variable show to false? Where do we store variables, Suzanne? Which part of this page do we store our variables? So I can maybe type in show is false, I'm hoping. I haven't looked at documentation. What does show mean? Oh, so I guess we can do that. Show is a actual attribute that we need to set to be bound to some variable. So show alert. So I'm assuming if we name this show alert to false, we may have some success. Hey, gone, the first one. How would that be useful? If you had, let's say, some kind of a form where the user logs in, tries to log in, if they mess up their password, how would you want to indicate to the user that they've inputted the wrong password? Yeah, and so how would we end up saying, okay, well, if they click submit and it's the wrong password, show them that alert? How, like, just tell me step by step, how do we handle that? So here's our, let's say they click calculate and they've left the value of bill 0. Let's handle that situation so we can show them alert that says, please, change the value. Okay, so we're going to go where? Okay. All right, so in scripts, methods, and which method should we handle that in? So we're going to try to show the red alert when they submit the form to try to enter the tip calculator. So the button that they click to submit is calculate tip function. Should we handle it in here? Okay. So how do we go about handling it? You were telling it a second ago. If, what are we checking? Yeah, this dot total bill, 3 equal signs to really be sure, and then yeah, equals 0. If it's equal to 0, we can say, how do we make that alert show up? We've currently hidden it by saying show alert to false. Huh? mean this dot show alert true, right? If you want to actually show it. So setting it to true. Huh? So currently it's false, and in that special like Bootstrap thing, it's saying, hey, bind the show, whether to show it or not, based on the value of show alert variable. So if it's false, it doesn't show it. If it's true, it ends up showing it. All right. And then what should we do as well? Yeah, what do we return though to stop it from executing the rest? I think you type return 2, yeah. I'm going to do false just for fun. All right, let's try it. So I click on calculate, and there's an alert. What would I want to do if they do change it and submit it? Do I want that alert to stay there? So how do I handle that in my code? Yeah, or what actually saves a lot of code sometimes is to like just always reset it at the beginning of a calculation. So this dot show alert is equal to false. Basically, every time they submit the form, you just kind of reset its state and then let it check against it. Shown, not shown. There's probably another trick we can do, which is simply assign the result to that. So this dot show alert equals, hey, if it's equal to 0, then show it. If it's not equal to 0, hide it. And once we dig into Vue a little bit more, it has fancy things like watching a variable as it changes. So you could always be tracking total bill, and the second that it sees, it changed to a value you want it to not change to, it can then trigger this exact thing to happen and show the alert. So